Okay, so let's start. So good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to have Matteo here also today for the seminar new session. So Matteo is, of course, our colleague here at the INAF Osservatorio of Pulsating. After graduating at the University of Bologna, completing his PhD at Tor Vergata and Rome University. And next, he spent nearly 20 years at the Astrophysics Institute of Canarias, including 5 years as a support astronomer. And after that, following a period of at the Rome Observatory, he is now, as I told you before, joining us here at the Observatory of Abruzzo as a permanent researcher from 2025. Right? His work focuses on stellar photometry, star formation history, and variable stars. And today we'll talk about resolved stellar populations and traces of galaxies. So, Matteo, you will have 45 minutes, and I will give you 10 minutes in advance.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here in presence or remotely. Yeah, since this is my first official talk here, many years, so I decided to give an overview of different projects I'm involved in, so I could be jumping a little bit between different topics, all related to local group, and of course, to mention many of my collaborators that I have the pleasure to work with, and especially PhD students that are involved, that are very important for our work. So first, let's start with some general consideration about the local group and how quickly our view of our neighborhood has been changing in the last 20 years and is going to change in the near future. So let's start this graph on the left with the simple fact that the number of galaxies that we know now in the local group has been increasing significantly in the last 25 years, both in the Milky Way and in M31. That's thanks to big projects such as the Pandas one. Here I see an example for, you can see an example for M31. So how much traffic there is around of stellar stream and dwarf galaxies. So we have a much more complex view of both the Milky Way and M31 with respect to what we had at the beginning of this century. Just to mention the latest result, this is the discovery of the last M31 satellite, Andromeda 36. I had the pleasure to participate in this work that was discovered by visual inspection of deep images by Giuseppe Donatello, and then followed up with the GTC. So you see the teeny tiny object here between the two bright stars. This is the CMD. Few stars. It's a faint object. We estimated a visual magnitude of -6. And this is interesting because if you see in this plot, this is the absolute magnitude of clustering galaxies as a function of the half-life radius. The red crosses, which are the M31 satellite, all stop here at -6 more or less. So we are still missing in M31 a huge component of the faintest object that have not been discovered yet, but they must be there. But they're faint, they're distant, they're very difficult to pinpoint. Something similar has occurred to the Milky Way. Now, mostly thanks to Gaia, we have a completely different view of the Milky Way. Nowadays, we have knowledge of over 100 stellar streams in the outskirts of the Milky Way. And these are still remnants of accretion process that we can still see in the physical space. We really see the overdensity that can trace these structures that are being destroyed. But the big thing arrived when Gaia turned on. So now the keyword is surveys, big surveys. And I refer to this recent review by Anton Vasiliev because they made a very nice exercise of summarizing the property of many spectroscopic and photometric surveys. So you see here some example of photometric ones. And this is just a way also to wear your attention on the fact that even if each survey is typically very highly internally consistent, the problem is that when you start matching different data from different origins, you always have to take in mind that you have different spatial coverage, different resolution, different filters. So they're all different paths, but yes, there can always be a problem in matching different data from different survey. This is even more clear for the spectroscopic survey, because you have different wavelength coverage, different spectral resolution. This is nicely summarized by this plot. So you have to be really careful by the subtle systematics that can enter when comparing different data sets. So the second important keyword, other than surveys, is synergy. So let's try to put everything together. And the best example of this is the discovery of Gaia Enceladus. So these occurred after the release of the second data release of Gaia. It was first discovered from the radial distribution, the radial velocity that Gaia gave us as this spur of stars well separated from the disk component. That was confirmed by the chemical analysis. So chemical evolution is a strong tracer of the star formation history of the parent galaxy. So in this way, it was indisputably possible to identify Gaia Enceladus as an external galaxy accreted on the Milky Way. And then finally, the analysis of the color magnitude diagram that provided ages to the different stellar population. So this is the famous CMD with the split in the sequence, which allowed the derivation of the star formation history, in which it was disclosed that it was not, as initially thought, a difference in age, but these two populations are consistent with two populations with the same age, so two different entities with the same age but completely different chemical properties. Indeed, again, tracing the fact that the star formation history of the parent galaxies was different. So now we have a quite complete view of all the major building blocks that have occurred on the Milky Way, that have been identified in the dynamical space, again, mostly thanks to Gaia, in conjunction with spectroscopic survey. And we have a first idea of the accretion history of the Milky Way, as summarized here in this accretion branch. So I talked about star formation history. Let's give a bit more detail on this. This is a very powerful technique. The idea is that all the information on the evolutionary history of a stellar system is encoded in the color magnitude diagram. And we can extract all the information from the CMD. How do we do that? Via comparison with theoretical model. So we need a stellar evolution model, stellar atmosphere model, to compare with observation and provide a quantitative description of the system in terms of typically the two most important variables that are age and metallicity. So this approach has been used in the last 30 years by many groups with slightly different approaches. Algorithms are different, but the global idea is the one that I'm going to show you now. So we want to compare observations and model. So we have to define simple stellar populations, so ensemble of stars that are small in age and metallicity range, which we call exactly simple population. And we have to understand which of the simple population contribute most, so have produced more stars in that age and metallicity. That's doing comparing the star count in the observed CMD and the model one. And the two main outcomes of this process are the star formation rate as a function of time, that is the amount of stars that is produced. So the integral of this curve is exactly the amount of mass that is converted from gas into stars. So it's kilograms, or solar masses, if you prefer, per unit time. And the age metallicity relation. So how metal rich or poor are the stars that form at that age. These two curves can give a strong characterization, quantitative characterization on the evolutionary path of a stellar system. Next step. So the CMD is fundamental, but we can add extra information, because if we add the knowledge of the variable stars, it's like if we add an extra dimension to the CMD, because different families of pulsating variable star are represented the properties of the parent population, so in terms of age and metallicity. So the most obvious example are classical cepheids that are tracing the youngest population, few hundred million years, and on the other opposite, the RR stars. that are tracing the older population, considering the best traces of stars older than 10 gigayears. So now, the following, I'll try to show some result that combining these two approaches, we can have a really complete view on the evolution of galaxies. Let's focus a little bit on RR stars. There is this nice plot that Atlas Regedini provided a couple of years ago. It defines the RR stars as the Swiss Army knife of astronomy. And indeed it's true, because they can be used to trace many different properties. They are tracing of the population, they are metallicity indicator, they are distance indicator, they are reddening indicators, but not only this. This is concerning population in general, because of course you can use them to constrain stellar revolution models, stellar pulsation model, and dynamics in the stellar atmosphere. So they are really interesting objects that can serve for many, many different purposes. Let's start from the metallicity. So how do we do metallicity of RR stars? Well, of course, with spectroscopy. And high resolution spectroscopy is a possibility. However, it's pretty difficult task, both observationally and from the point of view of the data reduction, because these stars are pulsating. So the temperature and gravity change continuously with time. And so it's not that you can observe 8 hours the same stars, because all the features will be smeared out, the line profile changes with time. So from the data reduction point of view, it is a complicated task that has to be taken with care. And typically, if you want a large signal to noise in short amount of time, it requires big telescope or very bright stars that are not very good. Indeed, metallicity from high resolution is limited to a very small, or relatively very small, sample of few hundred stars. Things are about to change, thanks to mostly Foremost and WIB, because they will provide high resolution metallicity for potentially thousands or tens of thousands of RR stars. A cheaper and easier approach is that of low resolution. Here I mentioned mostly the delta S method that was introduced by Preston in 1959, and it's based on specific line of the calcium-2 that can be calibrated and allow to derive an estimate of metallicity that is not as precise as the high resolution, of course, but is more efficient. Indeed, using existing data from various surveys, it has been possible to obtain metallicity for a few thousand stars. The other methods are photometric. There are mostly two main methods. One is based on the Fourier coefficient, so it is based on analysis of the shape of the light curves. 30 years ago, Jurcic and Kovacs found an empirical correlation between a specific combination of parameters and the metallicity of stars. And this is now widely used. There are a few recent recalibration based on high resolution spectra of this method, because this is easy to apply. You only need a properly sampled light curve. So this has been applied, for example, to large sample of Gaia stars, to the high metallicity distribution of large sample of field stars. The problem, one of the limitations, is that you really need good light curves. So if you have jumps, then the method is not so solid, and you may have absolute values of metallicity. An alternative method that we proposed 10 years ago is the use of the period luminosity relation. This is typically used the other way around, so assuming a metallicity to derive the distances. But indeed, if you have a distance from another source, you can apply this star by star basis and derive an estimate of the metallicity. So both this photometric method, they have quite large error bars of the order of 0.3, 0.4 per stars, but they work really well to characterize a population. And indeed, you see a comparison between spectroscopic and metallicity distribution derived with this method and with the delta S. This is on the left is Sculptor. Dwarf galaxies is one of the two galaxies in the local group for which the delta S method has been applied. And on the right, you have the case of omega Centauri. So in particular, what's really a good prediction of the method is the spread. of the distribution. And that is interesting because a large spread metallicity means that inside the population of RR Lyrae, you have an intrinsic metallicity spread. And that means that at all population, your galaxies have been able to enrich very, very quickly, because you can produce RR Lyrae only over a very short, relatively short, 2-3 years amount of time. And if in that amount of time you see a chemical evolution, it means that the galaxy has been able to self-enrich on that time scale. This is an example. Again, sculptor. You immediately see from the comparison between evolutionary track from the zero-age horizontal branch that you cannot fit the luminosity distribution of these 500 RR stars with one metallicity. And indeed, the metallicity distribution that we derive from this sample suggests an intrinsic spread of about 0.3 times. So a sizable spread in metallicity on this galaxy. There is another interesting point here. The two panels on the right, here the central one on the right, show the comparison between the metallicity distribution of the RR Lyrae and two different samples of RGB stars. So why is that one comparison is good and the other one is not? It's not a problem of the method. It's an interesting feature of the population that we are sampling, because the panel on the right, there is the sample is biased toward the center of the galaxies, with a large fraction of younger and more metal-rich stars are present that are reproduced in the metallicity distribution of the right giant branch. But that population is too young to produce RR stars. So that's why we don't observe it in the RR. So this is a warning that whenever you have extended star formation, assuming the metallicity from the RGB to characterize the whole population of the RR stars is probably a dangerous assumption. So one thing we are doing now is to apply this massively, since we've been working on many galaxies. So we are deriving metallicity distribution function for many of them, and trying to characterize the dependency, especially on the special metallicity with respect to the environment, to the morphological type of the galaxies, and all other properties that can be influenced. Okay, I'll show you now another case. This is CVN1. This is an interesting satellite of the Milky Way because it's one of the few above 200 kiloparsecs. So it's one of the few distance Milky Way satellite. Has been discovered late. Is one of the first ultra-faint to be discovered, but indeed it's not an ultra-faint. It's just that being that far, we have missed it for a long time. It has an intrinsic luminosity that's very similar to Draco and Rose. So it's not a real ultra-faint. So this work is based on the PhD thesis of Pedro Perez Garcia from the University of La Laguna. And he has been working in parallel on the star formation history and the variable star. So we have the first paper submitted, the second is almost ready. These are the light curves that we extracted from the homogeneous photometry database by Peter Stetson, 3 filters in BBI. The data comes, as I said, from 2 different datasets. So the deep data that we need from the deep CMD come from the ACS. There are 2 fields available in the archive. The data for the variables are ground-based, so we have a much larger area, and indeed the variables extend to a much larger area than the one covered by the ACS field. These are the CMDs, of course. ACS is the deep one, goes without saying. The shallower ground-based photometry is compensated by the larger area. So if you notice the horizontal branch, how much the statistics increase in covering almost the entire galaxies. We found more than 100 RR stars. There were only 23 known, so we have increased quite significantly the sample, and these are the results. Star formation rate shows a clear peak that occurred 12 years ago. It's quite narrow, suggestive of a small intrinsic age dispersion. The metallicity distribution as well is very peaked, around -2. So there is evidence of only one dominant population, pretty homogeneous, both in age and metallicity. Here is the same shown from above, is metallicity relation. Now the important plot is this one, because here we compare this metallicity distribution, which is the blue line, with the metallicity distribution derived from the variable stars, which is the red one, with the spectroscopic one derived from calcium triplet of RGB stars, which is the black dashed one. And we find an excellent agreement. So in this case, population is older, is more homogeneous, and there is a nice homogeneity that results from different techniques. So RR Lyrae, photometric photometricity from RR Lyrae are solid traces of early chemical evolution in galaxies. Okay, let's talk a little bit now about distances. Why are RR Lyrae interesting for distances? First, because they obey luminosity metallicity relation. This is known since long time, and this comes from the fact that the horizontal branch in the visual band is small, and its luminosity depends mostly on the mass of the helium core, which in turn depends on the metallicity. More metal-rich stars are fainter. And this is a simple relation that has been adopted basically for every galaxy you can think of that have RR studies, have a distance based on this, either the Johnson B or the equivalent HST filter. So it has been widely used in the literature. In the last year, pure luminosity metallicity relation became more popular because they suffer less from problem. I mean, this is simple to apply, but it is really tricky because, as we said, metallicity is difficult to define in a galaxy. We don't have spectroscopy. The evolution of stars move the stars away from the zero age horizontal branch. There is an intrinsic spread luminosity that complicates things. Anyway, pure luminosity in the near infrared, here you have a few examples. An empirical one on the left from Anupan Bhargav's paper. This is the Ecuador spheroidal. And here you have some theoretical models, prediction from Marcella Marconi. In this case, these are pseudomagnetons of Azenite that are microstructure written in free. Here each line show a different metallicity. So you see that there are combinations, such as this one, that other than being red and free is also metallicity. So a very nice property. Yeah. Exactly. So application of this breakup. Again, we refer to photometry from Peter Stetson database. In this case, we have 5 filters, UV-VRI. CMD is beautiful, but let's just focus on the light curves and on the fact that we can combine this photometry with the one I showed you the previous slide and the near infrared. So we have 8 filters to play with. So what we did, this is a work I've been doing with Anna Persimoni in the course of last year. We've been playing with different combination of filters, and we found out that there are unusual combinations that have not been tested before that present a very small intrinsic dispersion. So they are worth investigating more for this determination. Of course, there are some that are completely useless, but this is the point where we are now testing different filter combination, trying to see if there are systematic, for example, coming from a specific color or from a specific band. And this is from the observational side, and at the same time implementing new models consistent with the old one, which are the theoretical prediction. Okay, let's expand a little bit the discussion. RR Lyrae distances, we are now in the epoch of the Hubble tension. We know that different techniques provide different value of the Hubble constant. So can we think of RR Lyrae as a substitute of cepheids at the base of the distance scale? And I would say that the first answer is no, we cannot. for the simple fact that we cannot observe RR Lyrae as distant as the surface, because they are intrinsically fainter, so we cannot go that far away. So if we check the famous VS plot, we will not be able to observe RR Lyrae, not even in NGC 4258, not even with the ELT, I would say. So a real first rank based only on RR Lyrae is not possible, but how far can we observe RR Lyrae? Maybe this is not a number that people commonly mind. So I like to show this plot because it gives you a visual image of how the luminosity of the horizontal branch change with distance. So we have the closest double cluster, and we have the closest galaxy, the LMC, which is still easy to do from the ground, we have an isolated galaxies to Cana, 900 kiloparsec. The horizontal branch here is already at 25, so that's global with the HST. But how far can we go? Can we really go to magnitude 30? And the answer is no. So the most distant are around 2 megaparsec nowadays. Still done with the HST. Of course, there is also a trade-off. These are variable stars. So you cannot integrate as long as you want, because otherwise you will lose variability. So the compromise between a proper observing strategy and intrinsic luminosity results in the fact that we cannot observe much farther than 2 megaparsec with the HST. On the other hand, RR Lyrae are much more numerous than cepheids. They are everywhere, in the disk, in the bulge, in all galaxies, except the very, very small ones. So they are perfect to complement cepheids and to cross-check cepheids, because we can homogeneously calibrate the whole local group within a common distance scale. And with this respect, RR Lyrae are the perfect target to do it, because they are numerous, they are easy to observe, they can be done within a radius of 2 megaparsecs, so we can really set the entire local group on a common distance scale. So from the most distant stars, let's try to do is using the closest RR Lyrae. And this is another project. This is the thesis project of Manuel Sanchez Benavente that has been working on the closest RR Lyrae to derive new relations to use them as distance indicators. So to do this, we have selected a sample of nearby RR Lyrae stars that cover a broad range of period, broad range of metallicity, and of course, they must be tied to Gaia, so they have to be bright, because we want the best possible distances based on Gaia parallaxes. So we have studied for years now. We have a very good characterization of these stars in terms of photometry, innate filters from the U to the K band. We also have high resolution spectroscopy, mostly based on Mercator. And this is one of the important points. We've been using a small telescope for this project, because the Johnson data comes from the 80-centimeter telescope of the Teramo Observatory in Tenerife, the infrared data from the 1-meter class telescope IRSF, the Japanese telescope in South Africa, and we are now integrated with Sloan data again with 2-meter class telescope in Tenerife. Moreover, we have taken over 2,000 RR Lyrae in 45 globular clusters, again from the Peter Stetson database, and we have put everything together, and we are now finalizing the fit to derive the metallicity luminosity relation in a variety of filters. We have split the fit in 2 phases. We have used the globular cluster to constrain the period slope. We have not used all the 2,000 variables. We made some strict selection on the quality of the light curve, etc. But still, we have over 1,000 stars that have been used to this process. The idea is that being in cluster, we have many variables per metallicity beam, because they all have the same metallicity. They are all at the same distance. We are assuming that they also have the same extinction, but we are trying to implement a star-by-star correction to decrease the dispersion. And then we used the result of the first fit as a prior for the second one to characterize the 0 point and the sloping metallicity. So since this is still work in progress, I'm not going to show specific number, but just a comparison. These are distances derived with our relation compared to the Bankar and Basilian distances that are based on Gaia. The other interesting extension, as I said, we have a lot of stars already, even more stars observed in the Sloan filters, and I wanted to show you this particular one because thanks to Fiore, he got a few images from Campo Imperatore because he wanted to test the time series way of observing. And despite the fact that the data are not fully calibrated, the light curve looks very nice. So these are points from 3 different instruments. There is a very nice consistency. So I think there is a lot of work that can be done in Campo Imperatore for this kind of project, and especially when the infrared camera will be operative. Okay, let me give a little twist now to the topic. Let's keep talking about dwarf galaxies and RR Lyrae stars, but with an eye to the future. So these are images from Rubin telescope, from the DP1 data release. So Fornax is one of the most massive Milky Way satellite other than the Magellanic Clouds, 100 kiloparsec. This has been imaged together with 47 TAC during the commissioning of the telescope. So here we see Aztec. It's not really good here, but it's much nicer on the screen. Aztec of all the images that they observed on these galaxies. You see they were testing the telescope, and that's why there are all these rotation of the camera that are really bothering when we reduce the data. Here you see a zoom on the central region. There is some crowding, but it's not. I've seen worse, so there is still chance for a beautiful colorimetric diagram. Now, concerning the variable stars, these were not extracted from this data, and you'll see in a moment why. These come again from Peter photometry. We have already identified and characterized and we published soon more than 2,000 RR Lyrae stars from these galaxies. So these are the almost 2,000 that I recovered from this photometry. And these are the light curves. Okay, you may think they are deceptive or ugly or useless, and in a way, you're right. You may expect LSST beautiful light curves. Okay, they're beautiful, and I'll tell you why now. This is the point. The point is the data are everything except good for variability. They have been observed in 2 nights. There are very few images, as you can see, there are very few points, and they cover very few minutes. So they are completely useless in this sense for variability. Indeed, I looked for specifically AB stars that we caught on the rising branch. So this is a very short phase that lasts less than 2 hours. And why I was interested in this? Because here you can clearly see that the photometric precision and accuracy is really good. So this is a distant galaxy, 140 kiloparsec. But still the error bars on the individual measurement is really small. So these light curves are really beautiful in the sense that let us be very optimistic on what we will have with LSST. Because it's true that the data were not observed with the cadence of the survey, but yes, with the same exposure time that will be used. So the real data will be of this quality. More examples. I really have to look for them, but it's not that I picked only the good one. Okay, but LSST is not able to do everything. What about N31? It's too north, will not be covered by LSST. What has been done and what can we do? There's a lot of stuff around N31. what about the knowledge we have in terms of RR Lyrae stars? Actually, is really small. It's not zero, but it's small. So this is a nice compilation by Tanapoli and Sarajadini that put together all the fields. These are all pencil beam based on HST ACS data. So immediately you see that we have a sub% coverage of the area. So we have a very limited information, and indeed we only have 1,500 RR Lyrae stars in M31 and less than 200 in M33. So there is still a lot of work to do. Things is slightly better for the dwarf galaxies because there are a number of papers devoted to this. Many have been observed either with the ACS or also with the LBT. So in a way, we have much more knowledge of variable star in the dwarf spheroidal than in the field of M31. The big problem, you can see it in this plot. This is the coverage of ACS in red and Wi-Fi camera 3 of existing data for a series of M31 satellites. You immediately see that even there, the coverage for most of them is small. So even if we have information, we are far from being complete. Possible solution to this is impossible to do with the HST, of course, is Raman. And indeed, we have worked with a lot of people to a proposal in the very recent call for proposal of Raman to work on specifically on F31. But this is a multi-purpose proposal, but what we could put in two fields, one here in the area of M31 and one here in the area of M33. It is specifically thought for star formation history, so multiple observation, and therefore RR stars. So if we succeed, there would be a beautiful demonstration case for a largest proposal specific for variable stars M31. We'll see. Okay, let's go further. Fringes of the local group. What about James Webb? Can James Webb be better than HST? Okay, we have an interesting case here, WLM. These are HST data. This is my CMD and my variable stars. I specify here the exposure time because this is important for the discussion. These data were collected in 4 chunks of a few hours over a total baseline of 3.5 days. This is good because you can obtain decent coverage in phase for RR stars, because you have the short baseline for the shorter period and a few days for the longer period. Same galaxy has been observed by time-wise group with the James Webb. They used a different strategy. So for the two short wavelength filters, they have 090 and 150. They basically have 4 details. Each detail was the sum of 9 exposures. So when you go to the archive and you download your data, the highest level, this is called level 3, will provide you 4 images in each filter because it combines these 9 exposures. So in principle, useless for variable stars. The point is that if you reduce the data independently, or if you stop at the level 2, then you can recover the independent exposure. Now in this case, you will have 36 and 28, which in principle are really good. But now there is the other problem. The observations were collected in this way. So notice this is the dark curves in both filters, but here we have time. We don't have phase. So they observe one filter in a row of the exposure, the second filter in a row, the other exposure. So this makes, again, despite the large number of points, useless, mostly for variable stars, because you don't cover enough time to study variability. Why is this? The problem is that the James Webb has a huge overhead in pointing. So if you split the observation in many pointing, you will be killed by overhead. If you want to optimize for other stars, you can easily end up with, I don't know, 10-hour observation and 10-hour overhead. So 100% overhead, which makes the proposal absolutely unfeasible. But now there is the good point. So these are the light curves that we extracted from this data. So still, in some range of period, you can do something. You can notice that the black triangles correspond to the photometric for stacked images. But these are not good enough. The point is that, can we combine HST and James Webb? And the answer, of course, is yes, especially because the F090 from James Webb is almost identical to the 814, which is widely used, always used with HST. There is a simple linear relation. It's basically an eye field with a small color term. So now the cool thing is that when you combine together, and despite the fact that there are 8 years in between the two data sets, you can really retrieve very good libraries. And in passing, you will also know the much smaller error bar in the James Webb photometry than the ACS that is in blue. So there is a strong potential here of synergy between little amount of James Webb observation together with already observed galaxies with the HST. In particular, there are a few galaxies around 1 megaparsec, a bit less, a bit more, that are all dwarf irregular, for which we have RR Lyrae stars, and for which we have cepheids in the same galaxies. And of course, we also have the tip of the giant branch, none of them. So there are a small group of galaxies that are perfect to test different distance method in the same system under controlled conditions and to test possible systematics, especially extending the cepheids to low metallicity. But I want to go more distant. Okay, we have a case of one galaxy, Leo P. Leo P is a 1.6 megaparsec. You see, this on the left is the ACS colorimeter diagram. It's 10 plus 5 hours of observation. The same group, we observed it a few years later with the James Webb. In this case, the amount of observing time is quite important. It's almost 30 hours, so much longer than the ACS. But indeed, even at this distance, they go well below the old sequence RR. So you can derive, and they did, the proper star formation history for this galaxy. But there are a few galaxies at this distance that are in the group of NGC 3109, sorry, that are 5 galaxies, all of them except one are dwarf irregular, that could be done within the same scheme. But we're interested in going further down. If we have RR Lyrae until 2 megaparsec, what can you do at 2 megaparsec? So this quality CMD, even with the James Webb, will require a much longer amount of time. So I think it's feasible. So what can we use RR Lyrae for to constrain the old star formation in these galaxies? So there are 5 galaxies, more or less at 2 megaparsec, plus or minus 0.2. These two, GR8, KK230, these are irregular, especially this one is appear young main sequence star, typical of irregular system. There are these two, KKS3 and KK258, that seems to be spheroidal. There's no evidence of young main sequence here. So they could be isolated, purely old galaxies in the field. It's really interesting. Do purely old galaxies exist in the field? But we have to be careful. Look at these galaxies, KKR25. This is the CMD based on 1 orbit. This is the same galaxies and based on 16 HST orbit. So not only we detect a not so young, but still a main sequence as young as almost 1 gigayears, but also we could detect a sizable sample of anomalous cepheids that are sampling intermediate age. So these two may not be, so the intermediate to young population may be hidden by the fact that the photometer is not deep enough. But in this case, RR Lyrae can help us So let's take the star formation history that we have analyzed from many galaxies. So here we have star formation rate for different systems, all based on very deep photometry reaching well below the Holman sequester north, properly calculated star formation history. So you can devise two flavors here. Systems that are mostly old, that we call fast, because they do everything quickly at the beginning, and slow. So galaxies that start very slow, and they form the majority of their stars at intermediate to young ages. How do we connect these with our Lyrae stars? In a very simple way. So from the star formation history, we take the integral of the star formation in an age bin that is representative either of the RR stars or the giant brain stars. And from the CND, we count. Simply, we count the number of RGB and RR stars. And this ratio, basically the number of RR normalized to the bright RGB stars, correlates very well with the star formation history. So why is that? Well, that's simple to understand. Up here, you have purely old system, RCVN1. You have one old population, the same population is tracing the RGB and the RR stars. As soon as you have galaxies with more and more prolonged star formation history, at some point, the galaxy will stop producing RR Lyrae, but it will keep producing RGB stars, and that's why the ratio goes down. Until the extreme case of Lyrae, which only has 10 RR Lyrae and a huge peak of star formation 5 gigayears ago. So this relation has a strong predicting power, because if you have RR Lyrae, and we're not talking even about periods or luminosity, simply the accelerator agreement of the star formation that later was found calculated by McQueen. So this is a very strong predicting power that can be applied to this galaxy and see whether, in particular, these two are purely old or not. Okay, I have my last slide. One point, okay, we are here concerning the number of variable stars, and in a few years we will jump here, one order of magnitude. And we will end up here, drowning in tons of data from different telescopes and projects. So I guess that we really need, I mean, we have observed a huge change in the last 10 years, but I think it will be an order of magnitude larger in the next 10, 15 years. So we really have to develop an alternative way of thinking our work and our approach to data, especially for the young generation, and keep having fun. Thank you.
Well, a very naive question. I didn't understand why a single orbit you have such a diagram, and in 16 orbits you populate different fields.
I think,
Because I cannot read the numbers.
yeah, okay, basically, this thing you see here, I mean, the RGB gets larger, is somewhat the red clamp that is mixing up there. So these stars are blue, are completely missed by a shallow photometry. In this case, we had longer exposure, individual longer exposure per orbit. So that was all.
Oscar, at the beginning, you shown this discovery of a new
Yes.
satellite of M31. And so, concerning the still unrevealed objects, what we need in order to improve this discoveries, more angular resolutions,
I guess simply
So-
deeper. I mean,
deeper.
yes, because
It's a question of
these
denseness.
the pandas map have been investigated a lot, but it's not that deep. And so if I could choose, I would do something similar with Subaru, remind it deeper, and that would.
May I add a comment?
Sure.
I think it's also about the last
Mm.
the last slide we showed,
Mm.
because with these instruments that Euclid is now going to be doing this job, and then soon LSST, there will be so many of these objects that will be there, but it will be impossible to identify them visually. I mean, we got one case of a dwarf object that hasn't been identified around. It's a satellite to a satellite of Hornet. I don't know if you've seen it. It's Timur who found it, Timur Sebolai. But he did it visually, just because it's the kind of guy that looks at the data, stays there, stares at the data, whatever. So he found this little thing. But how did you find this galaxy around Andromeda?
But yeah,
But it's visual, it's just by chance. So it's not only the quality of data, so it's that, but it's also the techniques. So we really need to be clever in terms of digging the data. Because it's going to be soon impossible to look at all the data we have to identify those sources. So we need something more clever than visual inspection, but whatever is available now doesn't work well. Because all the automatic machine learning methods we have, they just miserably fail because they either get too many objects or too few objects. And then I have also curiosities. One is about why you ruled out ERT for larger distances. And I expect that you can do a vehicle with BET,
but not RLI.
not RR.
For the same reason that you can, I mean, you need short exposure, relatively short exposure. I think you can get to 5 megaparsec, 4, I don't remember exactly, for RLI. And for other
Okay,
things.
so because you need the depth, but also time
Exactly.
resolution.
Exactly.
Okay, so
So that's
you cannot do like 1 day exposure.
Exactly.
Because it's gonna. And then, can you say something, can you go to the one of the last plot we showed, I mean, one with the ratio of
Yes.
RGB? I probably lost part of it. Can you go back, can you describe it again?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, from the beginning.
So, yeah, this is how do you count the RGB stars, for example?
Okay, we set the tip
Yeah.
and we count 2.5 minus below the tip.
Okay, so it's not arbitrary.
It's arbitrary. We try to clean from HBs, but typically for these galaxies, it's pretty easy. Also in one ACS field, there's not much field domination, but we try.
I said the quantity on the y-axis is basically something that, what is that?
So here we are counting RGB and RR stars. So from the, imagine we have many CMDs like this for all these galaxies. So for all of them, we have variables and we have star formation history. So we have RGB here, and so here we have the age range in which RGB are produced. So this is the total mass of the population that produces RGB in blue. And the same for the RLR, assuming, again, little somehow arbitrary 10 gigayears. So this ratio correlates with this ratio.
The evolutionary game scale. Yeah, I can't really. It's exactly the same, but it will be the unused information. Which is interesting, because this demonstrates that we are parameterizable. If you need the additional.
Okay,
Any questions from
Remote questions?
from remote?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Then I think that I can thanks again.
Thanks.
The next seminar by